An elderly woman sat quietly in her wheelchair at the edge of the open plains, her gaze lost in the endless horizon. The air was still, save for the occasional whisper of the wind brushing the tall grasses. Suddenly, a wild Mustang appeared, its presence both untamed and majestic. The horse moved with a grace that was mesmerizing yet hesitant, as if it were uncertain of its surroundings. As the Mustang drew closer, something remarkable happened. An unspoken connection formed between the two. What could such a free, wild creature possibly seek from someone confined to a wheelchair? This singular moment would spark a chain of events that defied all logic and expectations, weaving a story of resilience, hope, and the profound power of an unspoken bond. Margaret Peterson had lived on the edge of the plains for as long as she could remember. Her small, humble home stood as a sanctuary of memories, adorned with photographs and tokens from a time when she had been an accomplished equestrian. She once rode horses with a skill and elegance that left onlookers in awe. But her life changed irrevocably 20 years ago after a car accident rendered her paralyzed from the waist down. Now, at 78, Margaret's interaction with horses was limited to watching the wild Mustangs that roamed the plains from the vantage point of her porch. Her days were routine and uneventful, her solitude broken only by the weekly visits of her granddaughter Emma, who brought groceries and shared warm conversations. Despite Emma's company, a deep yearning for the freedom she once knew lingered in Margaret's heart. The endless plains stretched out before her backyard, a stark reminder of what she had lost and the untamed beauty that still thrived in nature. One crisp morning, Margaret wheeled herself outside to savor the gentle warmth of the sun. She noticed something unusual. A lone Mustang stood at the edge of her property. Unlike other wild horses, which typically avoided human dwellings, this one ventured closer, too close. Its dark, lustrous coat shimmered under the sunlight, and its intelligent, curious eyes seemed to meet Margaret's. Margaret froze in place, her breath hitching. Wild horses rarely approached people. They were known for their cautious nature. Yet this Mustang stepped forward, its hooves crunching softly against the dry grass. Margaret's heart raced as the animal closed the distance between them, stopping just 20 feet away. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and disbelief. The horse flicked its ears as if it understood her words. Margaret's chest ached as she gazed at the magnificent creature before her, so free and full of life. A pang of longing swept through her. She had spent 2 decades yearning for the freedom this Mustang so effortlessly embodied. But the moment shattered when the Mustang abruptly turned and galloped away, disappearing over the hill as swiftly as it had appeared. Margaret sat motionless, her hands trembling. For the first time in years, she felt a spark ignite within her, a flicker of wonder and purpose she thought had long since faded. When Emma visited later that day, Margaret shared her encounter. "A wild horse came up to me," she said, her voice tinged with awe. Emma chuckled softly. "Maybe it was just a dream, Grandma," she replied, assuming it to be one of Margaret's vivid recollections of the past. But Margaret knew better. That Mustang had come to her for a reason, and she felt deep down that their story wasn't over. The next morning, Margaret wheeled herself to her usual spot on the porch, the early sunlight casting a warm orange glow across the plains. She scanned the horizon, her heart silently hoping for another glimpse of the mysterious Mustang. Hours passed, and the day unfolded quietly as usual. Just as she was about to head inside, she heard it, the faint, rhythmic sound of hooves against the ground. Her breath caught as she turned toward the plains. There it was, the same Mustang from the day before. It approached with measured steps, cautious yet deliberate. Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. In all her years of watching wild horses, none had ever exhibited such boldness or curiosity. This time, the Mustang came closer than before, stopping mere feet away from the porch. It stood still, its deep, soulful eyes studying her as though trying to decipher the frail woman before it. Margaret instinctively reached out, her hand trembling. "Hey there," she whispered gently. The Mustang didn't move but flared its nostrils, as if breathing her in. The connection between them felt almost tangible, as though the animal recognized something in Margaret that no one else had. Unlike before, the Mustang didn't bolt. It lingered, grazing nearby while keeping her in its peripheral vision. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as an old woman bound to a wheelchair, but as a soul worthy of connect. In the days that followed, the Mustang began appearing more frequently. Each visit brought it closer to Margaret's porch. She started leaving out small buckets of water for it and eventually gave it a name, Shadow, for its sleek, dark coat that seemed to blend seamlessly with the twilight. When Margaret shared her experiences with Emma, her granddaughter remained skeptical. "Wild horses don't just walk up to people, Grandma. Are you sure you're not imagining things?" Margaret smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the wild recognizes the broken, Emma. Maybe Shadow sees something in me that you can't." Not everyone in the small town shared Margaret's reverence for Shadow's presence. One afternoon, a local rancher named Tom spotted the Mustang near his cattle. "That horse is trouble," he warned Margaret, his tone firm. "Mustangs spook the herds, and if it keeps hanging around here, someone's going to come after it." Margaret's chest tightened. She was all too aware of the dangers wild Mustangs faced, being captured or, worse, killed for wandering too close to human territories. Shadow was no exception, and the thought of losing this connection filled her with dread. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret sat on her porch, her eyes scanning the vast plains. Shadow appeared again, this time coming closer than ever before. As their eyes met, Margaret felt a deep and unshakable resolve. If the world was against Shadow, she would protect him at all costs, even if it meant opposing the neighbors she had known for decades. Shadow's visits soon became a daily occurrence. Each morning, Margaret would wheel herself to her porch, her heart lifting at the sight of his sleek, dark figure moving against the golden backdrop of the plains. His cautious nature began to soften, and Margaret found herself speaking to him as she once had to her beloved horses many years ago. "Good morning, Shadow," she said one sunny afternoon, holding out a carrot in her wrinkled hand. At first, Shadow hesitated. His ears flicked back and forth as if assessing the situation. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the offered treat. Margaret held her breath, careful not to make any sudden movements that might scare him away. To her astonishment, Shadow took the carrot from her hand, his soft lips brushing against her palm. Margaret's laughter rang out, pure and unrestrained, echoing across the plains. It was a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years, a laugh born of joy, not out of politeness or obligation. That day, Shadow stayed close, grazing near her yard, as Margaret watched, her heart swelling with a purpose she thought she had lost long ago. News of the wild Mustang's unusual behavior spread through the small town. Curious neighbors began stopping by, intrigued by the stories they'd heard. Some marveled at the bond between Margaret and Shadow, while others, like Tom the rancher, viewed the situation with disapproval. "That animal doesn't belong here, Margaret," Tom said one afternoon, his voice stern. "You're encouraging him to stay, and that's not good for anyone. Wild horses belong out there, not around people." Margaret met his gaze with steady determination. "He's not bothering anyone, Tom. He's just looking for something, just like I am." Despite Tom's warnings, Margaret continued to nurture her bond with Shadow. She began leaving out hay and fresh water, creating a small area near her porch where the Mustang could safely rest. With time, Shadow's trust in her deepened. He allowed her to stroke his neck, her frail fingers tracing the contours of his strong, muscular frame. For Margaret, these moments were more than just a connection with a wild animal. They were a lifeline. Each touch, each soft nicker from Shadow, seemed to erase years of loneliness and sorrow. In him she saw a reflection of her own spirit, wild, untamed, and yearning for freedom despite the odds. But the peace between Margaret and Shadow was short-lived. One afternoon, as Shadow grazed near the house, the distant roar of an engine broke the tranquility. Margaret's heart sank as she recognized the sound of Tom's truck pulling up the driveway. He stepped out, his expression grim. "Margaret, I warned you!" he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "That horse has been spotted near my cattle again. If he causes trouble, the authorities won't think twice about taking him down, and I won't be able to stop them." Margaret's voice wavered, but her resolve remained firm. "Shadow isn't causing trouble, Tom. He's just lost, like so many of us are." Tom sighed, shaking his head. "You can't save every wild thing, Margaret. Sometimes it's just the way of the world."